chapter 3, we're going to look at interest rates, where they come from, what they mean, and later we're going to see how to calculate future interest rates. So we start with a very basic approach, which is where do they come from? Who cares about interest rates? We all care about interest rates, right? We all borrow money, and sometimes we even supply money. You'll see what I mean by that. The key here is the interest rate. What's the interest rate? The interest rates are nothing but the price of money. It may be a very difficult thing for you to understand at first, but think about it, right? The interest rate is the amount of money that you pay to get money that you don't have, or if you look at it the other way, is the amount of money you receive when you sell your own money. Okay, so I have 5 charts across. I have interest rates on the y-axis and quantity of funds, the amount of money on the x-axis. Very common approach in economics, right? So we're going to start with households, consumers, you and me. We both demand money very often, right? From credit cards to mortgages to car loans, etc. The higher the interest rate, the less money we demand. The lower the interest rate, the more money we demand. Let's think about this, right? If the interest rate is, compare the interest rate at 80% and at 0%. At 0%, you will demand all the money in the world. At 80% interest rate, you wouldn't demand that much because it will cost you a lot of money to get those funds. So, if you were to draw this, it will look like that. Now I don't know how to get rid of it. It will look like a downward sloping curve. The higher the interest rate, the less you demand. The lower the interest rate, the more you demand. Okay, so those are households, consumers. Okay, who else demands money? Businesses demand money, right? They need money to expand, to invest in new projects, to buy other companies, to make payroll, you name it. And they basically have the exact same experience. The lower the interest rate, the more money they demand. Who else do we have? The federal government in general, but in this case, we're talking about the federal government. Why is it a straight? Why is it a perfectly vertical line? Why does it look like that? Because the government doesn't really care that much when they need to borrow. They don't care about the price of interest rate. The federal government can borrow anytime. They don't care how much they need to pay because, after all, they're using your money. So why would they care? So as you can see, they demand what they demand regardless what the interest rate is. That's why it looks like a straight line. To them, it doesn't matter. Who else do we have here? Well, we have municipal governments and smaller government agencies. Well, they kind of care. There goes my. They kind of care. Go away. Oh, this is business. This is government, right? And now we're going to have here municipal. They kind of have a line that is not quite as steep as the households or the businesses. It's somewhat dependent on interest rates because they do care. Why is that? Because municipals, towns, cities, and others, they don't have the dollar printing machine, so they do care what the interest rate is. They have a fixed amount of population that they can tax, so they do care slightly about it. So a little more inclined. Finally, who else do we have? Well, we have foreigners. Okay, foreigners. They too demand US dollars because they can they can borrow US dollars from the United States if they have the ability to do so. And just like households and businesses, the lower the rate, the more they will demand. Okay? So if you take, so these five forces of demand, this is what's behind the demand for money at any time. So if you take all five and you add them together, right? All five, you end up with a aggregate. So here we have interest rates, here we have quantity, we have the aggregate demand for money. Okay, that's what it looks like. Now what about supply? Supply is going to be very similar, right? Because households supply money, businesses supply money, government supplies money, municipal supplies money, and foreigners supply money as well. When do we supply money? We supply money when we save our money, when we invest our money. If you have money in your bank account currently, that's part of the money supply. You're supplying the money to the system. Okay, the bank takes that money and uses it to create loans and other things. So that's part of the supply of money. Clearly, to you, the higher the interest rate, the more money you're willing to supply, because you're going to get that interest, right? So if the bank gives you a higher interest rate, you as a household, you're going to give them more money. So it's going to look like that. That's a supply for households. Businesses, same thing. The higher the interest rate, the more money they're willing to invest and supply, the more of their own money, right? And then we have the government, which again doesn't really care. So it's a straight line like that. Municipal, same thing. If they have any money that they can save, they will invest it as well. It will also look like that. Don't pay too much attention to the inclination of each of the curves, except the federal government. That's actually key. They could be more or less inclined. That's not the point here. That's for another day. And foreigners also can supply us with money. If they see that in the U.S. interest rates are high, they will bring their money from overseas and invest in the United States, and that will increase the supply of money. So the result is, just like we did with demand, if you add all of this supply, right? If you add all of it, you end up with the aggregate supply of funds, of loanable funds. So you have the interest rate on the y-axis and the quantity on the x-axis, just like in each of the individual curves. Okay, so that's kind of it. That's where the supply and the demand for money come from. So if you put all of this together, if you put the take that off, if you combine the two, you end up with something like this. You will have the supply, and then you will have the demand. So these are the interest rates, and this is the quantity. Where the two intersect, right here. That determines the level of interest rates. Where those two lines cross, that's equilibrium. And that's where we can find interest rates to be, where the equilibrium is met, which is where the supply and the demand meet. If interest rates are, for whatever reason, anywhere above this level, let's say up here, right? The forces of the market will bring down the interest rate until it reaches equilibrium. Same thing, if the interest rate is down here, the forces of the market, basically in this case it will be demand, there will be more demand, and it will push the interest rates up and back up to the appropriate to the equilibrium, to the interest rate equilibrium.